Senator
Thank
Sessions.
you, Senator Coons.
To return to an issue a number of senators asked about before, but I just want to get clarity about a particular concern I had. The intelligence community has issued a unanimous opinion with high confidence that at the highest levels, the Russian government engaged in an organized cyber attack that was designed to influence the American elections. And it is, as you've mentioned before, emblematic of the kinds of threats that the United States faces, whether it's China stealing our intellectual property or hacks into our federal database that affects a lot of federal workers, or in this case, a direct attack on democracy. And you mentioned in response to a previous question you haven't been fully briefed on this. But there is a bipartisan bill that's been introduced to strengthen and sustain sanctions against Russia for this attack on our democracy. Is that something you'd support?
That is something that's appropriate for Congress and the chief executive to consider. In other words, how do you respond to what's believed to be a cyber attack from a major nation? It's difficult just to say, well, we're going to prosecute the head of the KGB or some group that's participated in it, no longer a KGB, of course. But so in many ways, the political response, the international foreign policy response may be the only recourse. And it would help in that light that more clarity be established, which Senator Coons, you probably understand more than I, the discussions about having the world know that if you do X to us, you can expect we're going to do Y to you.
Well, I think this bipartisan bill is designed to be a forceful response, to provide predictable preemption of other countries that might believe that they could engage in a successful cyber attack to influence future elections, whether at the federal or local level. So I urge you to get briefed up on it, as all senators can now, and to have a clear public stance on it. Let me move to immigration, if I might. Alabama had a state statute that forced its schools to check students' immigration status before allowing them to enroll in school. Are you concerned at all that that statute might target innocent children and discourage school attendance for juveniles?
First, I had no involvement in that statute. Secondly, I believe the court struck that statute down. I'm not sure.
I believe that's correct.
Some of the act was declared improper and some not. So I don't, what was your question exactly?
Well, I'll follow up if I
Yeah.
could. There was a statute in Alabama that was designed to require teachers, school administrators, to check the immigration status of students before enrolling them. And I believe at that point 5 years ago, you made a public statement that we've allowed a sad situation for decades where large numbers of people are in this country illegally, and it's going to have unpleasant and unfortunate consequences. Some took that to mean that you felt that it was an unfortunate consequence, but appropriate, that children who were brought here illegally by their parents could be denied access to education.
Well, they cannot be denied access to education. The courts have decided that, as I understand it. The question is, could you even ask if you're lawfully in the country or not? And I don't know what the law is on that subject. But what I was getting at was that this is a continual problem and will continue to be a problem if we don't end the lawlessness. I mean, you'd rather have children, immigrant children, and children of immigrants here that came lawfully rather than unlawfully. It creates a problem that we don't need to have, and I believe is within our grasp to fix, and I believe people of goodwill will support that, and we need to get that done, and a lot of problems in our country and will be fixed, and a lot of our ability to create a more harmonious system in the future could become possible once this illegal system is fixed.
Well, as you know, Senator, on this committee together, many of us worked, put great effort into crafting a bill that ultimately passed the Senate by a strong bipartisan margin, would have invested heavily in securing the border and address a lot of unresolved issues in immigration. But my recollection was you did not support that bill. It's my hope that we can find a bill, as you say, that you could support. Let me move to another point. We worked together to restore funding to the Federal Public Defender Service when it was cut by sequestration, and I think that's because we both agreed that outcomes are more fair when there's effective representation on both sides. One of the amendments I offered to that immigration bill would have provided counsel to children who were applying for refugee status because they were fleeing violence in their home countries in U.S. immigration proceedings. Is that something you would support?
Senator Coons, excuse me, as I understand it, that is the law, that you cannot provide all lawyers to illegal entrance into the country, and I don't believe it makes distinguishes between minors and adults. But I may be wrong about that. I presume that's why you've offered legislation to that effect, to change established law. But in general, I do not believe we can afford, nor should we undertake, to provide free lawyers for everybody that enters the country unlawfully. I think that would be a massive undertaking. So you're talking about children specifically. I understand that.
Specifically those who are applying for asylum.
Congress would need to decide what to do about.
Let me ask you another question, if I might. There was a lot of discussion in the course of the campaign. It was a very vigorous campaign about the role of immigrants and in particular Muslims in this country. And I just want to make sure I've understood this. You believe it's improper for the government to discriminate based solely on a person's religion, correct?
That's incorrect. I believe that religion as practiced by and understood by an individual could make that individual subject to being denied admission if that individual's practice of their religion would present a threat to the country. So we have no requirement to admit somebody who claims to be religious who would present a threat to the United States, and I strongly think we have every right to inquire into those kind of radical and dangerous ideas that some might present.
So there's about 3 million Muslims in the United States today. There have been Muslims in America since its founding. Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran. Would you support a national registry of Muslims? And what sort of surveillance of mosques do you think would be appropriate within the constraints of civil liberties and respect for free exercise?
I would not favor a registry of Muslims in the United States. No, I would not. And I think we should avoid surveillance of religious institutions unless there is a basis to believe that dangerous or threatening illegal activity could be carried on there. I'm not aware that there's a legal prohibition on that under current law.
Let me ask a last question, if I might. As Alabama's Attorney General, this is back in 1996, there was a conference planned at the University of Alabama, and this was for LGBT students. A conference to talk about a wide range of issues, from health to status in society for the LGBT community. And based on a state law, you sought to prevent that conference from happening. And a federal district court held that the existing state statute, Alabama state statute, that prevented gatherings in public buildings for the advocacy of sodomy and sexual misconduct, I'm quoting. The district court held that that clearly violated the First Amendment, the free speech rights of students to gather and talk about their lives. And you publicly announced that you intended to do everything you could to stop that conference, and I believe sought an injunction, which was later denied, and the 11th Circuit later held that this law was unconstitutional on its face. Would you think, looking back on this now, given your statement earlier that you understand the needs for justice of the LGBTQ community, that it was a poor use of state resources to defend a law that was so facially unconstitutional?
Senator Coons, that statute, the litigation started in another university before I became Attorney General. It was going on for about a year, and I believe the litigation arose from the group filing a declaratory judgment against the law, and as Attorney General, I felt I should attempt to defend the law, and the court ruled against it. And it would have been better we hadn't passed the law, and it would have been better the controversy hadn't occurred.